Elena Whitcomb learned the sound of a heart breaking long before the Alpha King ever spoke her sister's name. It was not loud. It did not shatter like glass or roar like thunder through Moonspire Hall. It was quiet, almost polite, a small tearing inside her chest as she stood half-hidden behind a marble pillar with Maribel's silver train folded over her arms like a servant's burden. Above them, the vaulted ceiling opened to the night through a circle of crystal, and the full moon poured down in a pale white column over the royal dais, turning every gold cup, every jeweled throat, every lifted face into something holy and untouchable. This was the choosing night, the ceremony whispered about across the Northvale Kingdom for months. The night King Callan Westbrook would select the woman who would stand beside him as Luna. Elena had polished Maribel's combs until her fingertips ached. She had pinned pearls into her sister's honey blonde hair. She had tightened the laces of a gown that cost more than every dress Elena had owned in her entire life. And now she stood in the shadows, wearing soft gray wool, her ash-brown hair brushed but unadorned, the cracked moonstone pendant beneath her collar the only beautiful thing left that truly belonged to her. "Keep your eyes lowered," Vivian Whitcomb murmured without turning around, her smile still fixed for the watching nobles. "Tonight is not about you." Elena already knew that. In the Whitcomb household, very little had ever been about her except blame. Her father, Edmund, stood near the front with his shoulders stiff and his jaw set, pretending not to notice how his second wife had placed Elena behind the family line instead of beside it. To the court, Maribel Whitcomb was the treasure of Silverbrook Pack, graceful, golden, trained since childhood to pour tea without trembling and speak to kings without sounding hungry. Elena was the other daughter, the quiet one, the Omega whose wolf had always felt more like a distant breath than a living flame. The one people remembered only when something needed mending, carrying, cleaning, or forgiven. A hush rolled through the hall before the trumpet sounded. Elena felt it first in her bones, a pressure like winter moving through closed doors. Then King Callan Westbrook entered. He was taller than rumor, dressed in black formal leathers beneath a long midnight cloak clasped with silver. His dark hair was swept back from a face carved with restraint, and his eyes, cold and metallic as moonlit steel, passed over the gathered women with the controlled attention of a man who had never been allowed to want anything freely. Every wolf in the room bowed. Elena bowed too, but as she lowered her gaze, something strange stirred beneath her ribs, gentle and impossible, like her quiet wolf lifting its head for the first time in years. Callan paused only a breath when his eyes crossed the shadows near her pillar. Elena's fingers tightened around Maribel's train. For one foolish second, she wondered if he had seen her. Not as an errand, not as an embarrassment, but her. Then Lord Everett Crane stepped forward and announced the formal beginning of the choosing, and the moment vanished beneath music, protocol, and expectation. One by one, noble daughters were presented beneath the moonbeam. Each curtsied. Each offered a smile polished sharp enough to cut. Maribel moved last, exactly as Vivian had planned, glowing as if the light had been waiting only for her. A ripple of admiration moved through the hall. Elena saw her sister's smile soften into something practiced and tender as she knelt before the king. "Your Majesty," Maribel said, her voice sweet enough to make cruelty seem impossible. Callan looked down at her for a long moment. His expression revealed nothing, but the court leaned forward as one hungry creature. Elena held her breath without meaning to. She did not know what she hoped for. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps only a kind glance from the moon, a sign that being unseen was not the same as being worthless. Callan extended his hand. "Maribel Whitcomb," he said, his voice carrying to the farthest balcony. "I choose you." The hall erupted in applause. Vivian's hand flew to her heart in perfect triumph. Edmund closed his eyes, relieved. Maribel placed her fingers in the king's palm and rose like a woman stepping into a crown that had always belonged to her. Elena remained behind the pillar with the abandoned weight of silver fabric in her arms. No one looked back. No one noticed when the cracked moonstone against her skin turned suddenly cold. And as the kingdom celebrated the sister the Alpha King had chosen, Elena lowered her eyes and told herself that some hearts were simply born to break quietly. Maribel did not release the king's hand until the applause had softened into music, and even then she let her fingers linger, as if every person in Moonspire Hall needed time to understand that she had won. Elena watched from the edge of the dais while servants swept forward with crystal trays, white roses, and cups of warm, spiced wine. Her arms still held the silver train Mirabelle had forgotten, the fabric heavy now with crushed petals and the weight of a future Elena had never been allowed to imagine for herself. "Do not stand there looking wounded," Vivian whispered as she passed, her pale gown brushing Elena's sleeve like frost over dead grass. "A loyal sister smiles." So Elena smiled. It was small, careful, and painful enough that Nora Bellamy, stationed near the east arch with the other palace attendants, saw it from across the hall and looked away as if witnessing it was almost indecent. Mirabelle turned then, radiant beneath the moonbeam, and held out one gloved hand without taking her gaze from the nobles gathering to congratulate her. "Elena, my hem." The command was soft, almost musical, but several ladies nearby heard it and hid their amusement behind jeweled fingers. Elena stepped forward and knelt to free the edge of Mirabelle's gown from the silver claw of the royal dais. The polished floor was cold through the thin wool of her dress. Above her, Mirabelle laughed at something Lord Everett Crane said about destiny favoring beauty, and the sound slid under Elena's skin more sharply than an insult would have. She had heard that laugh since childhood, bright and harmless in public, edged with teeth in private. "Careful," Mirabelle murmured, low enough for Elena alone. "I would hate for you to ruin the first thing in this room that is worth more than you." Elena's fingers paused only once before she loosened the delicate thread. She did not answer. There had been a time, years ago, when she might have defended herself, when her mother was still alive and the Whitcomb house still had one room where kindness was not treated as weakness. But her mother had left her only three things: a memory of warm hands, a warning to stay gentle without becoming small, and the cracked moonstone pendant hidden beneath Elena's collar. She reached for it now through the fabric, just once, kneading the familiar shape against her fingertips. Across the hall, King Callan stood with Elder Roscoe Hale and the High Priestess, Celine Ward, accepting formal blessings with Mirabelle at his side. He looked every inch a sovereign carved from winter discipline, yet he did not look happy. Elena told herself that was not her concern. Kings did not owe joy to girls they had not chosen. "Elena." Her father's voice came from behind her, strained and quiet. Edmund Whitcomb did not meet her eyes when she rose. "Your sister will need you tonight. Do whatever Lady Vivian asks until the royal household assigns her attendants." There it was again, wrapped in duty instead of cruelty, her place. Not daughter, not guest, not blood of his blood standing beneath the same moon, but useful hands at the edge of someone else's blessing. Elena swallowed the ache in her throat. "Yes, father." Something flickered across Edmund's face, almost shame, but Vivian arrived before it could become anything braver. She held a velvet case open in both hands, displaying a set of diamond hairpins shaped like crescent moons. "The Queen Mother's pins," Vivian said, her voice sweet with victory. "A gift from the royal treasury for the chosen bride. Elena, fetch Mirabelle's white cloak from the carriage, the one with the pearl clasp. She must be seen leaving in perfection." "I will go with her," Nora offered suddenly, stepping forward before protocol could stop her. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "That is unnecessary. The outer corridor is crowded, my lady," Nora said, lowering her head. "Two hands would be quicker." Elena felt gratitude so sudden it nearly broke her composure. Vivian waved them away, already turning back to Mirabelle. In the corridor beyond Moonspire Hall, the noise dimmed to a distant, glittering roar. For the first time all night, Elena could breathe. Nora touched her elbow gently. "You should not have been made to watch it from the shadows." Elena looked down the long marble passage toward the open doors where moonlight spilled over the steps. Maybe shadows are safer. Safe is not the same as fair. Elena almost smiled, but the pendant beneath her collar pulsed cold again, so sharply she stopped walking. Nora noticed. "What is it?" Elena drew the moonstone out just enough to see it resting in her palm, its old fracture catching a line of pale light. For an instant, the crack seemed deeper than before, like a tiny lightning vein trapped inside the stone. Then the glow faded, leaving only the familiar dull shimmer. Elena closed her fingers around it before Nora could ask more. "Nothing," she whispered, though her heart had begun to beat strangely. Behind them, from inside the hall, the court cheered as Mirabelle was announced again beside the king. Ahead, the moon hung over the palace steps, bright and silent, as if it had heard everything and chosen not to speak yet. The white cloak was not in the carriage. Elena searched beneath the folded travel blankets, behind Maribel's jeweled slippers, even under the velvet seat, where Vivian often hid things she did not want servants touching, but the pearl clasp was gone. Nora held the lantern higher, its light trembling over the empty cushions. Maybe another attendant brought it inside already, she said, though her voice carried little conviction. Elena knew better. In the Whitcomb household, nothing disappeared by accident on a night when Maribel needed to shine, and Elena needed to be reminded that shadows could still be punished. I will check the bridal chamber, Elena said, turning back toward the palace doors. If Lady Vivian asks, tell her I am coming. Nora caught her wrist. Elena, be careful. Your stepmother has that look tonight. Elena managed a faint smile. She always has that look. But as she crossed the moonlit steps and slipped into the quieter west corridor, the cold pulse of the pendant returned, sharper now, beating against her chest like a second heart. The royal bridal chamber had been prepared beside Moonspire Hall for the woman chosen by the king, and every inch of it looked arranged for Maribel's triumph. White roses spilled from silver vases. A ceremonial mirror stood near the window, its frame carved with wolves and crescent moons. On the dressing table lay the Queen Mother's crescent hairpins, glittering beside a circlet of pale diamonds. Elena should have left as soon as she saw the white cloak draped neatly over a chair by the fire. Instead, she stood frozen for one breath, struck by the strange grief of seeing her sister's future laid out so beautifully. Not because Elena wanted the jewels, not even because she wanted the crown. She only wondered what it might feel like to enter a room and have the world prepare softness for you instead of work, touching what does not belong to you. Maribel's voice floated from the doorway. Elena turned quickly, cloak in hand. Maribel stepped inside with Vivian behind her, and the warmth drained from the room as if both women carried winter under their skin. I came for your cloak, Elena said. You asked for it. Did I ask you to stare at my gifts like a starving child outside a bakery window? Maribel crossed to the dressing table, still glowing from applause, but her eyes had sharpened now that no court ladies stood close enough to hear. Vivian shut the door with a soft click. Your sister is nervous, she said, though the sympathy in her voice was false. A great rise in station can make lesser relatives behave strangely. Elena folded the cloak over her arms. I have no wish to take anything from her. Maribel's gaze dropped to Elena's collar, where the moonstone chain had slipped free during the search. Something changed in her face. Not curiosity exactly. Possession. Then give me that. Elena's hand moved instinctively to the pendant. No, the word escaped before caution could stop it. Vivian's eyebrows lifted. Maribel's smile vanished. No, it was my mother's. Elena forced herself to keep her voice steady. It is all I have of hers. For a moment, something old and ugly passed between the sisters, a truth neither of them named. Maribel had been given tutors, gowns, introductions, and a mother powerful enough to clear every path before her. Elena had been allowed only memory. Maribel stepped closer. I am to become Luna. A moonstone would be appropriate for my first blessing. Surely you would not deny your future queen a sentimental trinket. Elena stepped back, but Vivian caught the end of the chain with 2 fingers and pulled. Do not be dramatic. Pain flashed at the back of Elena's neck as the clasp held. Please, Elena whispered, hating that the word came out at all. Maribel reached for the stone. Elena twisted away, not to fight, only to protect it, but the delicate chain snapped. The moonstone struck the marble floor between them. The sound was small. The silence afterward was not. A pale glow spread through the old fracture, first thin as thread, then bright enough to wash the room in silver. The fire guttered. The roses bent toward the window, though there was no wind. Maribel stumbled back, all color leaving her face. Vivian stared at the stone as if it had spoken a forbidden name. The door opened behind them, and High Priestess Celine Ward stepped inside, with Elder Roscoe Hale at her shoulder, both drawn by the sudden light. Celine's eyes fell to the moonstone, then slowly lifted to Elena. The priestess did not bow, but her voice lowered with a reverence that made Elena's skin prickle. Where did you get this? Elena knelt and gathered the stone with shaking fingers. Its crack still shone against her palm. My mother left it to me. Elder Roscoe exhaled as though a prayer had been pulled from his chest. Vivian recovered first. An old family charm, nothing more. But Celine did not look at her. She looked only at Elena, and in that gaze was fear, wonder, and the first hint of a truth too large for the room to hold. No, the the priestess said softly. Not nothing. From beyond the chamber walls, the celebration continued, unaware that in a quiet room beside the royal hall, the first thread of the king's chosen future had begun to come undone. High Priestess Selene Ward did not speak immediately. She stood in the center of the bridal chamber with Elena's moonstone resting in both hands, her weathered fingers trembling almost imperceptibly beneath its growing light. The room had become unnaturally still. Even the fire in the marble hearth burned lower, its golden flames shrinking as though yielding to something older than heat itself. Elder Roscoe Hale slowly crossed to the tall windows overlooking Moonspire Hall and drew back the ivory curtains. The full moon flooded the chamber in liquid silver. The moment its light touched the cracked stone, the fracture blazed like a river of stars. Maribel instinctively stepped backward. "Make it stop," she whispered, though no one had moved. Vivian reached for her daughter, but her own confidence had begun to fracture beneath the impossible glow. "It is only an old relic," she insisted, forcing calm into her voice. "Nothing more." Selene finally lifted her eyes. "No relic has answered the moon like this in over a century." Before anyone could answer, footsteps echoed beyond the corridor. The chamber doors opened. King Callan Westbrook entered with Lord Everett Crane only a pace behind him. The king had come expecting to escort his chosen bride before the court once more. Instead, he found every face fixed upon a single stone glowing in the hands of the kingdom's highest priestess. His gaze moved first to Maribel, as duty demanded, then to Selene. Finally, almost against his own intention, his eyes found Elena. The instant he looked at her, something ancient awakened inside him. His wolf, silent throughout the entire choosing ceremony, surged forward with such force that he nearly lost control of his breathing. Every instinct sharpened at once. He could hear Elena's heartbeat above the crackling fire. He caught the faint scent of pine after rain woven into the fragrance of the moonstone around her neck. His wolf did something it had never done before. It bowed, not to power, not to bloodline, to her. Callan stiffened. No, impossible. He had already chosen. His decision had been witnessed by every noble family in Northvale. His kingdom could not survive uncertainty. He forced the instinct back beneath years of discipline until the muscles in his jaw ached. Lord Everett noticed only the silence. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "there appears to have been a minor disturbance." Selene answered before Callan could. "Nothing about this is minor." Maribel crossed quickly to the king's side, slipping her hand around his arm. The familiar gesture should have felt natural. Instead, Callan experienced nothing. No warmth. No answering instinct. Only obligation. It unsettled him more than the glowing stone. Maribel searched his face. "Callan," she asked softly. It was the first time she had used his given name. He heard the word, but his attention drifted beyond her almost against his will. Elena had lowered her eyes, clearly wishing herself anywhere else. She looked frightened, not ambitious. Ashamed, not triumphant. That disturbed him even more. A woman seeking a crown would have smiled. Elena looked ready to apologize for existing. Selene stepped toward the moonlight and placed the stone upon the windowsill. "There is one thing I must know." She turned toward Elena. "Step into the moonlight." Elena hesitated. "I should not." "You should," Selene replied gently. "If this means nothing, then nothing will happen." Vivian immediately interrupted. "There is no need for childish theatrics." "Enough," Callan said quietly. The single word silenced the room. He looked directly at Elena for the first time that evening. "Please." The request surprised even him. Elena slowly crossed the chamber until moonlight spilled across the hem of her gray dress. Nothing happened for a heartbeat. Then every candle in the room extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed the chamber. A startled gasp escaped Maribel. Only the moon remained. Silver light poured through the ceiling and gathered around Elena like flowing water. The moonstone lifted from the windowsill without anyone touching it, floating gently through the air until it rested against Elena's chest. The old crack shone brighter than ever before. Beneath her skin, a faint silver crescent flickered across her wrist before disappearing again. At that exact moment, every wolf in the palace began to howl. One voice, then another. Then dozens more echoed across Moonspire Hill until the ancient stone walls trembled beneath the sound. The palace guards outside dropped instinctively to one knee, unable to explain why. Horses in the royal stables fell silent. Even the banners above the towers shifted though no wind touched them. Elder Roscoe stared in speechless disbelief. Celine slowly lowered herself onto one knee, tears gathering in her eyes. Merciful moon, she whispered. She has answered. Maribel's breathing became shallow. No, she murmured. No, this was supposed to be my night. Callan remained frozen where he stood. His wolf no longer fought to reach Elena. It simply waited with absolute certainty, as though it had recognized something his mind had spent the entire evening refusing to see. For the first time since ascending the Obsidian throne, King Callan Westbrook questioned not the loyalty of his council, nor the strength of his kingdom, but the judgment of his own heart. He had chosen with his eyes. The moon, it seemed, had chosen with something far deeper. Maribel was the first to move, and the softness she had worn all evening slipped from her face like a veil falling into fire. This is absurd, she said, but her voice shook enough to betray her. A flicker of light does not overturn a royal choice. Elena stepped back from the moonbeam, her wrist pressed hard against her chest, as if she could hide the place where that silver thread had appeared. She wanted to return to the corridor, to the carriage, to any corner of the world where no one expected her to explain a miracle she had not asked for. But Callan was still watching her, not with hunger, not with triumph, but with a grave confusion that frightened her more than anger would have. High Priestess Celine reached for the moonstone again, and this time, the glow quieted in her hand, patient as a held breath. No one here has overturned anything, she said. Not yet. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they gave Maribel room to strike. She turned to Callan with tears already brightening her blue eyes, perfect tears, summoned with the skill of a woman who knew the value of being pitted at the right moment. Your Majesty, I stood before your court. You chose me before every noble house in Northvale. If this rumor leaves this room, they will say you hesitated. They will say your throne can be swayed by an Omega girl's little charm. Elena flinched at the word charm because she heard what Maribel truly meant. Trick, shame, stain. Callan's expression tightened. He looked toward the door, beyond which hundreds of guests waited to see a king certain of himself. Lord Everett's warning had not needed to remain in the room to be felt. A sovereign who looked uncertain became prey to councils, cousins, old rivals, and every ambitious pack that smiled while sharpening its teeth. Elder Roscoe folded his hands over the head of his cane. There is a lawful way to settle this before gossip chooses for us. Celine's gaze sharpened. Roscoe, the Stone of Verity still stands in Moonspire Hall, he continued, reluctant but firm. If theft, deception, or forbidden influence is suspected, the accused may place her hand upon it beneath the full moon. The innocent are cleared. The guilty are marked. The chamber went silent. Elena understood only pieces, but her body understood enough to go cold. Maribel's tears stopped. Vivian would have smiled if she had still been in the room. Callan's eyes darkened. Elena is not accused. Then let her be cleared, Maribel whispered, and now her voice was gentle again, deadly in its gentleness. For all our sakes. For yours. Elena looked at the king, waiting for him to refuse. A foolish part of her, the part that had stirred when his gaze first found her in the shadows, waited for him to say that dignity was not a thing to be tested in public like silver weighed at market. But Callan was not only a man in that moment. He was crown, council, treaty, bloodline, and fear wrapped in black leather and royal restraint. When he spoke, his voice was low. We returned to the hall. Something inside Elena went very still. Not broken this time. Still. As you command, Your Majesty, she said, and the title placed a distance between them that even he seemed to feel. Celine closed her eyes briefly, as if pained, then fastened the broken moonstone chain into Elena's palm. Keep it with you. The walk back to Moonspire Hall felt longer than any road Elena had ever traveled. The celebration dimmed when the doors opened. Faces turned. Music stumbled into silence. Vivian stood near the dais, her eyes moving once from Maribel's face to Elena's, and understanding enough to arrange shock over satisfaction. Lord Everett stepped forward at once. There has been a concern regarding a sacred object and unauthorized influence upon tonight's choosing, he announced, making each word polished enough to hide its cruelty. A murmur swept through the nobles. Edmund Whitcomb looked as if age had found him all at once. Nora, trapped among the attendants, lifted one hand to her mouth. Elena was led to the center of the hall where the Stone of Verity waited beneath the moonbeam, a white slab veined with silver, older than the throne itself. She could feel every stare on her gray dress, her empty hands, her too quiet face. Maribel stood beside Callan now, but not touching him. That small gap hurt Elena more than the accusation. It meant he was unsure, but not enough. Elder Roscoe's voice carried over the crowd. Elena Whitcomb, do you submit to the stone? Refusing would look like guilt. Accepting might destroy the last piece of peace she had. Elena thought of her mother's hands, of the warning to stay gentle without becoming small. She lifted her chin. I submit. A ripple moved through the hall. Callan took one step forward, then stopped himself, and that hesitation became its own answer. Elena placed her palm upon the cold stone. For one breath, nothing happened. Then Lord Everett's voice cut through the silence. Ask it whether she stole from the royal chamber. Elena looked up, stunned. So this was the shape of the trap. Not only suspicion. Theft. A crime before the court. Maribel's face was sorrowful, beautiful, unreadable. Elena's fingers curled against the stone, but she did not pull away. There was no path back now. The girl who had stood unseen behind the pillar was gone, dragged into the moonlight by accusation, silence, and a king's terrible caution. Above her, the full moon brightened. Beneath her palm, the ancient stone began to warm. The ancient stone beneath Elena Whitcomb's trembling hand did not answer at once. For one endless heartbeat, Moonspire Hall remained silent enough for every soul inside it to hear the crackle of dying torches and the uneven rhythm of Elena's breathing. She closed her eyes, not to pray for victory, but for peace. If this was the moment she lost everything, she wanted to lose it without becoming someone she no longer recognized. Then the stone of verity grew warm beneath her palm. The warmth spread slowly through her fingers, up her arm, and into the cracked moonstone resting against her heart. A deep, resonant hum rolled through the hall, so ancient it seemed to rise from the mountain beneath the palace itself. Silver veins hidden inside the white stone awakened one after another until they shone like rivers beneath fresh ice. The nobles stepped backward instinctively. No one had touched the stone in generations without fear. Lord Everett Crane forced a confident smile. It proves nothing, he declared. The question was whether she stole from the royal chamber. High Priestess Selene raised her staff. Before it struck the marble floor, every candle in Moonspire Hall extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed the kingdom. A startled cry escaped somewhere among the balconies. Then, from the great crystal opening high above the throne, moonlight descended in a single brilliant column. It ignored the king. It ignored the throne. It ignored Maribel Whitcomb, standing in her white ceremonial gown. The silver light fell only upon Elena. Gasps echoed across the hall. The moonstone around Elena's neck lifted gently from her chest, as though invisible hands had raised it toward the heavens. The old fracture filling its center no longer looked broken. It glowed like a path stitched together by starlight. Elena stared upward, tears gathering before she understood why. She had spent her entire life learning how to disappear. Yet for the first time, she was standing beneath a light that refused to overlook her. The luna mark beneath her wrist awakened. Not as a faint flicker this time, but as living silver flowing beneath her skin. The crescent bloomed first. Then the ancient wolf sigil curled around it, completing a symbol every elder in Northvale recognized from sacred history. Elder Roscoe Hale fell to one knee without realizing he had moved. High Priestess Selene followed, tears slipping freely down her weathered face. One by one, the oldest wolves throughout the hall lowered their heads. No command had been given. Instinct alone had answered. Outside the palace, wolves across Moonspire Hill lifted their voices toward the sky. Their howls rolled across the valley until even the stained glass windows trembled. Horses in the royal stables stood perfectly still. Ravens abandoned the palace towers and circled beneath the moon as though welcoming a queen long expected. Maribel's face drained of every trace of triumph. No, she whispered. She cannot. Vivian reached for her daughter, but even she could no longer deny what every witness had seen with their own eyes. This was beyond politics, beyond noble blood, beyond ambition. King Callan Westbrook stood motionless beneath the throne banner, unable to look away from Elena. His wolf, which had struggled against him since the bridal chamber, no longer resisted. It simply bowed with complete certainty, recognizing what pride had refused to see. In that terrible, breathtaking moment, Callan understood that his greatest mistake had not been choosing Maribel. It had been failing to see the woman the moon goddess had recognized from the very beginning. Selene slowly rose to her feet, though she kept her head respectfully lowered. Her voice carried through the silent hall with the calm certainty of someone speaking truth rather than opinion. The stone of verity has answered. The moon has answered. The old blood has awakened. She turned toward Elena with tears still shining in her eyes. You were never hidden from the moon goddess, child. You were only hidden from us. Elena shook her head weakly. I am not a queen. Selene smiled with quiet sadness. No. She glanced toward Callan before returning her gaze to Elena. Not yet. Today the moon goddess did not place a crown upon your head. She looked toward every noble gathered beneath the crystal dome. She simply showed this kingdom whom she had chosen long before any king made his own choice. Silence followed. Not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence that comes after witnessing something no life will ever forget. Then King Callan Westbrook took one slow step toward Elena. He did not reach for her. He did not speak. For the first time since taking the obsidian throne, the Alpha King stood before the forgotten Omega with nothing left to hide behind. Not his crown, not his authority, not even his certainty. Only the unbearable weight of realizing that while he had chosen with his eyes, the moon goddess had chosen with her heart. No one moved for several long moments after the last echo of the wolves' howls faded into the night. Moonspire Hall had become a place suspended between two futures, one built upon the choice of a king, the other upon the judgment of the moon goddess. Elena Whitcomb remained beneath the silver column of light, her hand still resting on the stone of verity, though she no longer felt its warmth. She felt only the weight of hundreds of eyes finally seeing her after a lifetime of looking past her. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt strangely lonely. King Callan Westbrook was the first to step forward. Every instinct urged him to cross the remaining distance, yet he stopped several feet away. For the first time in years, the Alpha King did not trust himself to know the right thing to do. Elena, he said quietly. Her name sounded different in his voice now. Not overlooked. Not convenient. Human. Elena lifted her eyes. The silence between them carried every moment of the evening she wished had never happened. The shadow behind the pillar, the forgotten sister holding another woman's gown, the accusation before the court, the cold stone beneath her hand while he had watched in silence. Callan lowered his head. I thought my greatest mistake was choosing the wrong woman. His voice grew rough. I was wrong. My greatest mistake was standing still while an innocent woman was forced to defend her dignity alone. The confession settled over the hall with more force than any royal decree. Elena searched his face. There was no excuse there. No appeal to politics or tradition. Only a man confronting the truth too late to erase the hurt he had allowed. You were my king long before tonight, she answered softly. You did not owe me love, but you owed me justice. Callan closed his eyes for one brief moment. Every word struck exactly where it should. Across the hall, Edmund Whitcomb's shoulders sagged as though Elena's words had found him as well. He realized she was speaking not only to a king, but to every person who had watched her disappear piece by piece because silence had been easier than courage. Maribel suddenly laughed, though there was no joy in the sound. It cracked apart almost immediately. Do you know what my mother taught me? She asked, her voice trembling. No one answered. She looked directly at Elena for the first time without pride or mockery standing between them. She told me that if I was not chosen, then I would become invisible. Tears slipped freely down her face. Every dress, every lesson, every smile, every hour of my life was for this one night. She looked down at her white ceremonial gown. If I lost it, then what was left of me? The question hung in the air, heartbreaking because no one could answer it. Even Vivian's face paled. Perhaps for the first time, she understood the prison she had built for her own daughter. Elena watched Maribel for a long moment. She remembered little girls sharing the same hallway, passing each other without ever truly being sisters because ambition had filled every empty space where love should have lived. You were always more than a crown, Elena said quietly. Someone just convinced you that you were not. Maribel broke completely. She covered her face with shaking hands, not because she had lost a king, but because she had finally understood how much of herself she had surrendered trying to become someone worthy of being chosen. High Priestess Selene looked toward Callan. The moon goddess has spoken, she said. Now the rest belongs to human hearts. Lord Everett Crane stepped forward despite the warning in Callan's eyes. Your Majesty, emotion cannot govern a kingdom. The council will never accept replacing the chosen bride because of an ancient sign. Callan slowly turned toward him. Something inside the king had changed forever. No, he said calmly. The council may question my judgment. His silver eyes hardened. But they will never again question hers. The entire hall fell silent. Callan removed the royal engagement clasp from his ceremonial cloak and held it in both hands. It had been prepared for Maribel only hours earlier. Every noble understood what would happen if he let it fall. He looked at Elena, but he did not offer it to her. Instead, he placed it upon the stone of verity between them. No crown, he said. No title. No promise will be forced upon the woman the moon goddess chose. Then he stepped back. If Elena Whitcomb ever stands beside me, it will not be because destiny trapped her there. It will be because I become a man worthy of standing beside her. Tears blurred Nora Bellamy's vision among the attendants. Elder Roscoe lowered his head in quiet respect. Even the oldest wolves in the hall understood what had happened. The Alpha King had not won the Luna. He had surrendered the right to expect her. Elena looked at the clasp resting upon the sacred stone before lifting her gaze to Callan once more. For the first time since entering Moonspire Hall that evening, she did not feel like the forgotten sister. She felt like a woman free to choose. And somewhere beyond the crystal ceiling, beneath the endless silver sky, the moon remained bright and patient, waiting to see whether two hearts could accomplish what destiny alone never could. The moonlit grove did not welcome Elena with thunder or spectacle. It opened before her in the pale blue hush before sunrise, a ring of ancient oaks standing beyond the palace gardens, their bare branches laced with silver ribbons left by generations who had come seeking answers from the goddess. Frost silvered the grass beneath Elena's worn shoes. Behind her, the court gathered at the boundary stones, forbidden to step farther. Vivian stood stiff as a statue, Maribel wrapped in her white cloak with the pearl clasp now sealed in Elder Roscoe's keeping. Lord Everett watching with a calm that looked less like faith than calculation. Callan remained apart from them all, close enough to intervene and wise enough not to. For once, Elena did not feel his power pressing around her. She felt his restraint, and strangely, that mattered more. High Priestess Selene placed the healed moonstone in Elena's palm. The grove does not test the strongest wolf, she said softly. It reveals the truest heart. Elena looked toward the trees. And if my heart is tired? Selene's face gentled. Then let it be tired and true. The boundary stones glowed, and Elena stepped into the grove alone. At first there was only quiet. Then a small cry came from the hollow of a fallen oak. Elena turned, expecting a trick of wind, but found a wolf pup caught beneath a tangle of thorned roots, its silver gray fur damp with frost, one paw twisted painfully beneath it. Beyond the grove, the nobles shifted, confused. This was not the trial they had expected. No crown of light, no voice from heaven, no grand display to satisfy their hunger for certainty. Only a frightened little creature trembling in the cold. Elena knelt at once, forgetting the court, the accusation, even the mark on her wrist. Easy, she whispered, holding out her hand. The pup snapped weakly, not from anger but fear, and a few people at the stones murmured for her to leave it. Lord Everett's voice carried faintly. A distraction. The trial has not begun. But Elena knew suffering when she saw it. She had lived beside it for too long to mistake it for inconvenience. She tore a strip from the hem of her gray dress and wrapped it around her hand, easing the thorns back one by one despite the sting against her fingers. The pup shivered harder. I know, she murmured. Sometimes help feels like one more thing coming to hurt you. At the boundary, Callan's face changed. He heard her. More than that, he understood what she was not saying. With a final careful pull, Elena freed the pup and gathered it against her chest. The Luna mark warmed, not blazing this time, but glowing with a steady, living softness. The frost beneath her knees melted into green. The oaks bent inward as if listening. Selene drew in a breath. There, she whispered. That is the answer. The pup licked Elena's wrist, and the silver mark brightened into the crescent and wolf fully formed. At the same instant, the pearl clasp in Roscoe's keeping flashed dark, projecting a small memory across the morning air. Maribel's hand hiding it beneath Elena's folded shawl while Vivian stood guard, and Lord Everett later ordering the search before any charge had been spoken. The court erupted in shocked whispers. Maribel covered her mouth, no longer able to perform innocence. Vivian went pale with fury, But it was Lord Everett who stepped back first, already understanding that political control had turned into public disgrace. Callan's voice cut through the murmurs. Lord Everett Crane is relieved of his council seat pending judgment. Lady Vivian Wickham and Lady Maribel Wickham will answer before the royal court for false accusation and interference with a sacred trial. Maribel looked toward Elena then, and for the first time there was no polished sweetness, no practiced triumph. Only a young woman terrified of the emptiness beneath all she had chased. Elena, she whispered. It was not quite an apology. Not yet. But it was the first time she had said her sister's name without making it sound like a burden. Elena held the pup closer, her eyes tired but clear. I hope one day you learn who you are when no one is applauding. Maribel looked away as if struck by mercy more than blame. Edmund stepped forward with tears bright in his eyes. My daughter, he began. Elena turned to him gently, and that gentleness made him falter. Not today, father, she said. Today, I need to finish standing. The words broke something in his face, but he bowed his head and accepted them. Callan approached only when Celine nodded that the grove had released its claim. He stopped several feet away, giving Elena the space no one had granted her before. You proved them wrong, he said. Elena looked down at the pup sleeping against her torn dress. No, I proved that being gentle was never the same as being weak. Callan lowered his gaze, and when he looked back at her, the king was still there, but the man was finally visible beneath him. Then tomorrow, he said quietly, let me stand before them and prove I have learned the difference. The sun rose over the grove, turning frost to gold, and Elena felt the moonstone rest warm against her palm, as if her mother's hand had closed over hers one last time before the final choice awaited. When the royal court gathered once more beneath the crystal dome of Moonspire Hall, nothing resembled the celebration that had begun the night before. The music was gone. The jeweled banners hung motionless. Even the nobles who had once whispered so confidently now stood in respectful silence, as though afraid a single careless word might disturb the sacred stillness that had settled over the kingdom. Elena Wickham entered without a crown. She wore a simple ivory gown chosen by High Priestess Celine, and around her neck rested the moonstone her mother had left behind. The crack was still visible beneath its polished surface. It had not disappeared. It had simply become part of its beauty. Elena smiled faintly when she noticed it. Healing, she realized, did not always erase the places where something had once been broken. Sometimes it taught them how to shine. Beside the dais, Edmund Whitcomb waited with lowered eyes. When Elena approached, he did not reach for her. At last, he understood that forgiveness could never be demanded. It could only be deserved. I cannot return the years I failed you, he said quietly. But every year I have left belongs to becoming the father I should have been. Elena studied him for a long moment before giving the smallest nod. It was not forgiveness. It was permission to begin. Nearby, Maribel removed the jeweled necklace she had worn throughout the choosing ceremony and laid it upon the altar before Celine. I spent my whole life trying to become the woman everyone wanted to see, she whispered. I forgot to become the woman I wanted to be. Elena stepped forward. For the first time since they were children, she embraced her sister. Neither woman spoke. They simply stood together while years of rivalry quietly dissolved beneath the same moon that had once seemed determined to divide them. Even Vivian lowered her gaze, unable to defend the ambition that had cost both daughters so much. Elder Roscoe then struck his staff upon the marble floor. Let the final judgment be witnessed. King Callan Westbrook stepped into the center of the hall. He wore the royal black of Northvale, but his crown remained absent. Every noble noticed. Every elder understood. Without the crown, he stood not as the Alpha King commanding obedience, but as a man willing to be judged beside everyone else. He walked until only a few feet separated him from Elena. Then, before the entire kingdom, Callan lowered himself onto one knee. A quiet gasp swept across the balconies. Kings received kneeling. They did not offer it. He placed both hands, open and empty, upon the stone of verity. Yesterday, he said, his voice steady though emotion roughened every word. I chose with fear. I chose with appearances. I chose the woman my kingdom expected. His silver eyes lifted to Elena's. The moon goddess showed me that power without wisdom is only another form of blindness. He drew a slow breath. Elena Whitcomb, I cannot ask you to forget what I allowed. I cannot ask destiny to excuse my failures. I ask only for one thing. The entire hall seemed to stop breathing with him. One chance to spend the rest of my life becoming the man who would have recognized you even if the moon had remained silent. Tears gathered in Nora Bellamy's eyes. Celine smiled through her own. Even the oldest wolves lowered their heads in quiet respect, for they knew true strength when they witnessed it. Elena looked at the man kneeling before her. Then she looked beyond him. She saw Nora, who had believed in her when no one else had. She saw her father standing without excuses for the first time in years. She saw Maribel crying not because she had lost a throne, but because she had finally found herself. She touched the moonstone resting over her heart and thought of her mother, Amara Vale Whitcomb, whose final gift had never been the pendant itself. It had been the faith that one day kindness would be seen. Elena stepped forward. Instead of taking the king's offered hands immediately, she gently lifted his chin until he looked directly into her eyes. "I do not accept because the moon goddess chose me," she said softly. "I accept because today, you chose with your heart." Then she placed her hand in his. The Luna mark shimmered across her wrist. At the same instant, the mark of the Alpha appeared upon Callan's hand, and where their fingers met, silver light flowed between them before rising into the crystal ceiling like a river returning to the stars. Outside, wolves across Moonspire Hill lifted one long, joyful chorus toward the heavens. The sound carried through every valley of Northvale, announcing not the rise of a queen, but the beginning of a partnership built on humility instead of pride. Elder Roscoe placed the ancient crown into Callan's hands. The king looked at it only briefly before turning to Elena. "May I?" he asked. It was a small question, almost whispered, yet it was the most important one he had ever spoken. Elena smiled through her tears and nodded. Callan placed the crown upon her head with hands that trembled, not from power, but from gratitude. Then, instead of standing before her, he stepped beside her, shoulder to shoulder, equal beneath the moon. The court bowed as one, not because a king had made his choice, because the moon goddess had revealed hers. And for generations afterward, mothers throughout Northvale would tell their daughters about the night an Alpha King chose beauty, but the moon chose kindness. They would always finish the story the same way. Kings may choose with their eyes. The moon never does.